I never thought my life would be turned upside down by a moving truck and a power-hungry HOA board member. But that's exactly what happened on what should have been just another Saturday morning in Oak Ridge Estates. The late May sun was already beating down on my back as I directed the movers where to park their 26-foot truck in the cul-de-sac in front of my new home. Little did I know that this ordinary moving day would spiral into a 6-hour standoff, involve the police, and end with an arrest that would become neighborhood legend for years to come. My name is Scott Nelson, and after years of apartment living in downtown Portland, I had finally saved enough for a down payment on my first home. The 3-bedroom Craftsman in Oak Ridge Estates seemed perfect quiet neighborhood, good schools nearby, thinking ahead, and just a 20-minute commute to my job as a software engineer. The HOA fees seemed reasonable for the amenities provided, and the online reviews suggested it was a well-managed community. What those reviews failed to mention was Patricia Wilkins, the self-appointed guardian of HOA bylaws and neighborhood decorum. I had closed on the house just 3 days earlier and was eager to begin my new life as a homeowner. The moving company had given me an 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. window, but they arrived promptly at 7:45 a.m., which I considered a blessing. The sooner we started, the sooner I could begin unpacking and settling in. "Where do you want us to park the truck, sir?" asked Miguel, the lead mover, clipboard in hand. I pointed to the empty space directly in front of my driveway. "Right there should work perfectly. We can unload straight up the walkway." Miguel nodded, and his team began maneuvering the massive truck into position. That's when I first heard the shrill voice that would haunt my dreams for months to come. Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I turned to see a woman in her mid-50s marching toward us, her highlighted blonde bob bouncing with each determined step. She wore pristine white capri pants, a floral blouse, and an expression of utter indignation. A small white Maltese dog trailed behind her, its rhinestone collar glinting in the morning sun. "Good morning," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Scott Nelson, just moving in at number 428. She ignored my outstretched hand, instead crossing her arms and scanning the moving truck with narrowed eyes. "I'm Patricia Wilkins, HOA Vice President. You can't park that monstrosity here. It's just for a few hours while we unload. I checked the HOA guidelines and there's nothing prohibiting moving trucks during daylight hours on weekends." Patricia's lips thinned to a straight line. Section 12. Paragraph 3 of the bylaws clearly states that commercial vehicles cannot be parked on community streets without prior written approval from the board. I was caught off guard. I had read the HOA documents thoroughly before closing, but I didn't recall that specific restriction. "I'm sorry, I wasn't aware. Ignorance isn't an excuse," she snapped, pulling out her phone. "I'm documenting this violation. The truck needs to be moved immediately, or you'll be fined $150 per hour." The movers had already opened the back of the truck and were preparing the ramp. Miguel looked at me questioningly. "Look, Mrs. Wilkins," I said, trying to remain calm and reasonable. "Everything's already set up. Is there any way we could work something out? Maybe I can submit the paperwork retroactively." "That's not how it works here in Oak Ridge," she said, her tone suggesting I was some kind of criminal. "Rules are rules. Without them, we'd have chaos. I already have your violation on record. Now move this truck, or I'll be forced to escalate the situation." I looked helplessly at Miguel, who shrugged sympathetically. "We can try to park somewhere else, but it will make the move take much longer and might add to your cost." I was about to suggest moving the truck to the visitor parking area when Patricia's silver Mercedes SUV came screeching around the corner. A man in his 60s, who I would later learn was her husband, Howard parked directly in front of the moving truck, effectively blocking it in. "What are you doing?" I asked, incredulous. Patricia smiled triumphantly. "Ensuring compliance with our regulations. Howard will move our car once your truck is gone." I couldn't believe what was happening. "You're blocking my moving truck. That's ridiculous." "What's ridiculous is thinking you can ignore our HOA rules on your very first day," she replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "Consider this your welcome to Oak Ridge Estates. We take our community standards very seriously." The standoff had begun, and it was only 8:15 a.m. I tried reasoning with Patricia again, explaining that all my possessions were in the truck, that I had movers on the clock, and that I'd happily pay any reasonable fine and submit the proper paperwork after the fact. She was unmoved. "Rules exist for a reason, Mr. Nelson. If we make an exception for you, we'd have to make exceptions for everyone." I stepped away to call my real estate agent, hoping she might have a solution, or at least know who I could contact on the HOA board who might be more reasonable. "Scott, I'm so sorry this is happening," said Rachel, my agent, after hearing my predicament. "Patricia has a reputation in the neighborhood. She's caused problems for several of my clients over the years." "Now you tell me," I muttered, watching as Patricia paced in front of her car, occasionally snapping photos of the truck and my house with her phone. "I'll call the HOA president, Mark Lawson. He's much more reasonable. Just try to stay calm, okay? Don't give her ammunition to use against you later." While waiting for Rachel to work her magic, I approached the movers, who were standing awkwardly by the truck, uncertain what to do. "I'm really sorry about this, guys," I said. "I'm trying to resolve it as quickly as possible." Miguel nodded understandingly. "Don't worry, sir. We've seen worse. Once, we had to move an entire household through a second-story window because the condo association wouldn't let us use the elevator." That story should have made me feel better, but it only highlighted how powerless homeowners could be against unreasonable HOA enforcement. I glanced at my watch, 8:45 a.m. The standoff had been going on for half an hour, with no end in sight. By 9:30 a.m., Patricia was still standing guard by her car, now joined by Howard, who had brought her a folding chair and a thermos of what I assumed was coffee. They looked prepared for a long siege. Meanwhile, my movers were sitting on the back of the truck, scrolling through their phones and occasionally exchanging words in Spanish. I could only imagine what they were saying about this situation about me. Rachel called back with disappointing news. "Mark is out of town for the weekend, but he's trying to contact other board members. He says Patricia is overstepping her authority, but without a board vote, there's not much he can do remotely." I ran a hand through my hair in frustration. "So I'm just stuck. I can't move into my own house because this woman has decided to make a point." "I'm going to keep trying," Rachel assured me. "In the meantime, do you know any of your neighbors yet? It might help to get local support." That was a good idea. I had briefly met my next-door neighbor, an older gentleman named Frank, during the home inspection. Perhaps he could offer some guidance or support. As luck would have it, Frank emerged from his house just then, newspaper in hand, clearly curious about the unusual activity on our normally quiet street. "Morning, Scott," he called, eyeing the standoff with interest. "Having some trouble getting settled in?" I walked over to his property line, relieved to see a friendly face. "You could say that. Patricia from the HOA is blocking my moving truck because I didn't get prior approval to have it parked here." Frank's eyebrows shot up. "Patricia's at it again, huh? She's been on a power trip ever since she became vice president 3 months ago. Been making everyone's life miserable with her interpretations of the bylaws. Any suggestions on how to deal with her?" Frank lowered his voice. "Between you and me, most of the neighborhood is fed up. There's talk of voting her out at the next meeting, but for now—" He glanced over at Patricia, who was watching us suspiciously. "Let me make a few calls. The former board president lives 2 streets over. He might know a loophole." As Frank retreated into his house, I returned to my driveway, where the temperature seemed to be rising along with tensions. It was nearly 10 a.m., and the movers had been on site for over 2 hours without unloading a single box. "Mr. Nelson," Miguel approached hesitantly, "we have another job scheduled this afternoon. If we can't start unloading soon, we'll have to reschedule your delivery for another day." My heart sank. Rescheduling meant delaying my move-in, potentially paying for another night at a hotel and incurring additional moving fees. This was becoming a nightmare. "How much longer can you wait?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Maybe another hour maximum. I'm sorry, but we can't lose the other job." "It's a corporate account." I nodded, understanding his position but feeling increasingly desperate. This was when I decided to change tactics. If Patricia wanted to play hardball, I could too. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency police number. When the dispatcher answered, I explained the situation as calmly as possible. "So let me get this straight," the dispatcher said, sounding slightly bemused. "Your HOA representative has physically blocked your moving truck with her vehicle and is refusing to move it." "That's correct," I confirmed. "She's preventing me from moving into my own property and the movers are threatening to leave." "Sir, this sounds like a civil matter between you and your HOA, but since there's a vehicle being used to block access, we can send an officer to mediate the situation. It might be a wait, though we're dealing with several incidents this morning." "I understand, thank you." When I ended the call, I noticed Patricia watching me intently. I walked over to where she sat in her folding chair, determined to give diplomacy one last try. "Mrs. Wilkins, I've called the police to help resolve this situation." Her eyes widened slightly before narrowing again. "The police? Really, Mr. Nelson? Wasting taxpayer resources because you can't follow simple HOA regulations? You're blocking access to my property with your vehicle. That's not HOA enforcement, that's potentially illegal." Howard stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Now see here, young man. There's no need to get authorities involved. Patricia is simply doing her job as a board member." "Her job doesn't include blocking moving trucks with her personal vehicle," I countered. "I'm happy to pay any fine the HOA wants to impose for not getting prior approval, but what you're doing goes beyond HOA authority." Patricia stood up from her chair, her face reddening. "I am protecting property values. Do you have any idea what happens to a neighborhood when people start ignoring rules? First, it's unauthorized moving trucks, then it's cars on lawns, houses painted inappropriate colors, and before you know it, our property values plummet." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Mrs. Wilkins, I understand you care about the neighborhood. So do I, that's why I bought here. But surely there's a better way to handle this than creating a scene in front of everyone." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes by this point, watching the drama unfold from their driveways and front porches. I could feel their eyes on us, hear their murmured conversations. This was not how I wanted to introduce myself to my new community. Patricia seemed to notice the audience too, but rather than backing down, she doubled down. "Let them watch. Let them see what happens when you try to circumvent our processes." She turned to address the onlookers. "This is why we have rules, everyone, to maintain standards." To my surprise, no one seemed particularly supportive of Patricia's stance. In fact, several neighbors shook their heads and returned to their homes. One woman even gave me a sympathetic smile before walking away. It was now approaching 11 a.m., and the standoff had been going on for nearly 3 hours. The movers were getting increasingly restless, and I was beginning to worry they would leave regardless of the situation with the truck. Miguel had been on his phone repeatedly, presumably talking to his supervisor about the delay. Just as I was about to approach him again, a police cruiser turned into our street. The sight of it caused a stir among the remaining spectators, and Patricia's triumphant expression faltered slightly. She quickly recovered, straightening her blouse and patting her hair as if preparing for an important meeting. The police officer who emerged from the car was young, probably in his early 30s, with a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested he had little patience for neighborhood disputes. His name tag read Officer D. Martinez. "Good morning," he said, approaching our little group. "I understand there's a situation here involving a blocked vehicle." I stepped forward. "Yes, officer, I'm Scott Nelson. I just purchased this home and am trying to move in today. Mrs. Wilkins here is from the HOA and has blocked my moving truck with her car because she says I needed prior approval to have the truck parked here." Officer Martinez turned to Patricia. "Madam, is that your vehicle blocking the truck?" Patricia lifted her chin. "Yes, it is. This gentleman is in violation of our HOA bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 3, which clearly states—" "Madam," the officer interrupted, "I'm not here to enforce HOA regulations. That's a civil matter. But you can't use your vehicle to block someone else's access. That's potentially illegal obstruction." "But our bylaws," Patricia began. "Your bylaws don't override state law," Officer Martinez said firmly. "I'm going to have to ask you to move your vehicle immediately." Howard stepped forward. "Officer, with all due respect, we're simply protecting our community standards." "If everyone started ignoring the rules, sir," the officer cut in, "your HOA has legal avenues to address violations, including fines and civil court if necessary. Blocking a vehicle isn't one of them. Now, I'm asking politely, please move your car." Patricia's face had turned an alarming shade of red. She clutched her small dog closer to her chest as if seeking comfort. "This is outrageous. We pay taxes for police protection, not to have officers side with rule breakers." Officer Martinez remained calm but firm. "Madam, I'm not taking sides. I'm enforcing the law. Now, are you going to move your vehicle voluntarily, or do I need to call a tow truck?" I expected Patricia to back down at this point. Surely she wouldn't risk having her Mercedes towed, but she surprised me again. "Go ahead and call your tow truck," she said, voice trembling slightly. "This is a matter of principle. The board will back me up completely." Officer Martinez looked genuinely surprised at her response. He studied Patricia for a moment, then sighed and returned to his cruiser. I could see him speaking into his radio, presumably requesting a tow truck. "Mrs. Wilkins," I said, trying one more time to reason with her, "is this really worth having your car towed? The HOA can still fine me if they determine I violated the rules. You've made your point." "It's not about the fine," she snapped. "It's about setting precedents. If I let you get away with this on your very first day, what message does that send to everyone else?" Before I could respond, Miguel approached me nervously. "Mr. Nelson, it's almost noon. We really can't wait much longer." The situation was reaching a breaking point. I was about to lose my movers, Patricia was about to lose her car, and the entire neighborhood was watching this absurd spectacle unfold. It seemed impossible that this was happening in a quiet suburban community on what should have been a joyful day of new beginnings. Officer Martinez returned from his cruiser. "The tow truck will be here in approximately 15 minutes. Madam, this is your last opportunity to move your vehicle voluntarily." Patricia remained seated in her folding chair, arms crossed, the very picture of stubborn defiance. Howard looked less certain, glancing nervously between his wife and the police officer. "Patty," he said quietly, "maybe we should just move the car. We can document the violation and bring it up at the next board meeting." "No, Howard," she hissed. "If we back down now, it undermines the entire system. Besides, Mark will support me. He always does." I noticed Frank emerging from his house again, this time accompanied by an elderly gentleman I didn't recognize. They walked briskly toward our group. "Officer," Frank called out, "before things escalate further, there's something you should know." The elderly man stepped forward, extending his hand to Officer Martinez. "George Tompkins, sir. I was president of this HOA for 15 years before retiring last year. I helped write the bylaws Mrs. Wilkins is referring to." This new development caught everyone's attention, including Patricia's. Her expression changed from defiance to uncertainty. "The bylaw in question," George continued, "was indeed designed to prevent commercial vehicles from parking on our streets overnight or for extended periods. However, there is a specific exemption for moving trucks during daylight hours, provided they don't block traffic or remain for more than 12 hours. I should know I added that exemption myself after my daughter had similar troubles when moving into her first home." Patricia jumped to her feet. "That's not true. Section 12, paragraph 3 clearly states—" "Perhaps you should read paragraph 4 as well, Patricia," George interrupted calmly. "The exemptions are listed there. I have a copy right here if you'd like to see it." He held out a folder containing what appeared to be the HOA documentation. The look on Patricia's face was one I'll never forget, a mix of shock, embarrassment, and dawning realization that she had overplayed her hand spectacularly. She grabbed the folder and flipped through it frantically, her fingers trembling. This isn't the version I have," she stammered. "It's the official version approved by the board and filed with the county," George replied. "Perhaps you're working from an outdated copy." Howard placed a hand on Patricia's shoulder. "Patty, I think we need to move the car now." But it was too late. A tow truck had turned into our cul-de-sac, its yellow lights flashing as it backed up toward Patricia's Mercedes. The operator, a burly man with a thick beard, hopped out and approached Officer Martinez. "This the vehicle?" he asked, gesturing toward the Mercedes. Officer Martinez nodded. "The owner has refused to move it voluntarily." Patricia suddenly seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. She rushed toward her car. "Wait, I'll move it now. There's been a misunderstanding." "Madam, step away from the vehicle," Officer Martinez instructed firmly. "You had multiple opportunities to move it voluntarily. Now it's being towed as an obstruction. You can't do this." Patricia shrieked, her composure completely shattered. "This is my property. I'm on the HOA board." "Madam, step back from the vehicle now," Officer Martinez repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Instead of complying, Patricia lunged for her car door, yanking it open and throwing herself into the driver's seat. She fumbled with her keys, hands shaking visibly. "Patricia, don't," Howard called out, but she ignored him, starting the engine with a roar. Officer Martinez quickly moved to the driver's side window. "Madam, turn off the vehicle immediately. This is now a police matter." Patricia rolled up her window, ignoring the officer's command. She shifted into reverse, clearly intending to back away from the moving truck. What she failed to notice was that the tow truck operator had already positioned his equipment behind her Mercedes. There was a sickening crunch as her bumper collided with the tow truck's metal arm. Patricia slammed on the brakes, her face a mask of horror. "Get out of the vehicle now," Officer Martinez commanded, his hand moving to his belt. Patricia sat frozen for a moment, then seemed to make a decision that would change the course of the day and her life dramatically. She shifted into drive and hit the gas, attempting to pull forward around the moving truck. The problem was, there wasn't enough space. Her Mercedes scraped along the side of the moving truck with a noise that made everyone wince. Miguel and his crew jumped back, shouting in alarm. Officer Martinez immediately radioed for backup while running alongside Patricia's car, shouting for her to stop. She finally braked when she realized she couldn't get past the truck, but the damage was done both to the vehicles and to her legal situation. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands where I can see them," Officer Martinez ordered, his demeanor now completely transformed from mediator to law enforcement. Patricia sat in her car, seemingly in shock at what she had done. Slowly, she opened her door and emerged, her face pale and tear-streaked. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to move my car." "Madam, you're under arrest for failure to comply with a police officer's orders and reckless driving," Officer Martinez said, taking her arm firmly but not roughly. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The sight of Patricia Wilkins, HOA vice president and self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, being handcuffed in her pristine white Caprice and floral blouse was surreal. Her little Maltese yapped frantically from inside the car, adding to the chaos of the scene. Howard rushed forward. "Officer, please, my wife just lost her temper. She didn't mean any harm." "Sir, she damaged 2 vehicles and ignored direct police orders," Officer Martinez replied as he secured the handcuffs. "This goes beyond just losing her temper." A second police cruiser pulled into the cul-de-sac as Officer Martinez was reading Patricia her rights. By this point, practically the entire neighborhood had emerged to witness the spectacle. I could hear whispered conversations and even a few poorly concealed chuckles from those who had apparently experienced Patricia's zealous enforcement before. As Patricia was led to the police cruiser, sobbing openly now, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the standoff was finally over, dismay at how drastically it had escalated, and a lingering anxiety about how this would affect my standing in the community before I'd even spent a single night in my new home. George Tompkins approached me, extending his hand. "Not exactly the welcome to Oak Ridge Estates you were hoping for, I imagine. I'm truly sorry about all this." I shook his hand, grateful for his intervention. "Thank you for stepping in. I was beginning to think I'd made a terrible mistake buying here." George smiled kindly. "Don't judge us all by Patricia's behavior. This is actually a wonderful community. Most of us understand the difference between maintaining standards and, well, whatever that was." He gestured toward the police cruiser where Patricia now sat. Miguel approached, surveying the damage to his truck with a grimace. "The company will need to file an insurance claim, but it's mostly cosmetic. We can still unload your things if you're ready." "Absolutely," I said, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. "Let's get started right away." As the police took statements from witnesses, and the tow truck operator assessed whether Patricia's damaged Mercedes could still be towed, the moving crew began the work of unloading my possessions. Neighbors I hadn't yet met came over to introduce themselves, many offering help or apologizing for Patricia's behavior as if they were collectively responsible. "She's been on a rampage since joining the board," explained a woman who introduced herself as Linda from across the street. "Last month, she measured my grass with a ruler and fined me because it was half an inch too tall." "Half an inch," another neighbor, a man named Dave, added. "She cited me for having my garbage cans visible from the street 10 minutes before the allowed time." We've all been wondering when she'd finally go too far. It was nearly 2 p.m., 6 hours after the movers had first arrived, when my furniture and boxes were finally being carried into my new home. Officer Martinez had taken my statement and given me his card, explaining that I might be called to testify if charges were pressed. "Will she really be charged?" I asked, still processing everything that had happened. "That's up to the DA's office," he replied. "But at minimum, she's looking at charges for failing to comply with an officer's orders, reckless driving, and property damage. The fact that it all happened in front of multiple witnesses doesn't help her case." After the police left with Patricia, Howard approached me, looking utterly defeated. "Mr. Nelson, I want to apologize for my wife's behavior. She's been under a lot of stress lately, and she takes her HOA duties very seriously. Perhaps too seriously." Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for the man. "I understand, Mr. Wilkins. I hope everything works out." "The Mercedes was brand new," he said sadly, "just 3 weeks old. Patricia had been so proud of it. I wasn't sure what to say to that." The damage to the car had been entirely self-inflicted, a direct result of Patricia's own choices. Still, I nodded sympathetically. Howard hesitated, then added, "If there's anything I can do to make this right." "Just help ensure the HOA doesn't try to punish me for today," I replied honestly. "I'd like to start fresh," he nodded solemnly. "I'll do what I can. Patricia may be difficult sometimes, but she's not the entire board. Most members are reasonable people." As Howard walked away to deal with his wife's damaged car, Frank came over with a cold beer in hand. "Thought you might need this after the day you've had." I accepted gratefully, taking a long sip. "Is it always this exciting around here?" Frank laughed. "Only since Patricia joined the board, but I have a feeling things might calm down for a while after today." By late afternoon, the moving truck was gone. My furniture was mostly in place, and I was surrounded by boxes that would take days to unpack. Despite the chaotic start, I was finally in my new home. Several neighbors had stopped by with small welcome gifts: a houseplant, a bottle of wine, homemade cookies, each interaction feeling like an apology for the morning's events. As I sat on my porch that evening, enjoying the peace that had finally settled over the neighborhood, I reflected on the day's bizarre turn of events. I had expected challenges as a first-time homeowner, maybe a leaky faucet or a troublesome appliance, but certainly not a 6-hour standoff with an HOA representative that ended in arrest. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Rachel, my real estate agent. "Scott, I just heard what happened. Are you okay? The whole thing is all over the neighborhood social media groups." I couldn't help but laugh. "I'm fine. Just not exactly the moving day I had imagined. I'm so sorry." If I'd known Patricia would go to such extremes, no one could have predicted that, I assured her. "Besides, I've met most of my neighbors now, which would have taken months otherwise." Rachel sounded relieved. "Well, there's a silver lining, I guess." And between us, Patricia's reign of terror has been a problem for a lot of homeowners. Maybe this will finally lead to some changes in the HOA. After we hung up, I went back inside to continue unpacking. Despite the dramatic start, I was determined not to let it color my perception of my new home or community. Every neighborhood had its challenges, after all. Mine just happened to come in the form of a bylaw-obsessed woman with a power complex. The following morning, Sunday, I was awakened by a knock on my door. Still groggy and surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I made my way to the entrance, wondering who could be visiting so early. To my surprise, it was Mark Lawson, the HOA president, holding a gift basket and looking apologetic. "Mr. Nelson, I'm Mark Lawson. I'm so sorry about yesterday. I was out of town and only heard about the incident late last night when I returned. May I come in for a moment?" I invited him in, clearing some boxes from the living room to make space for us to sit. "First, I want to personally apologize for Patricia's actions," he began, placing the gift basket on my coffee table. "What she did was completely unauthorized and in no way represents how our HOA operates. She had no authority to block your moving truck, regardless of any perceived violations." "I appreciate that," I said, genuinely relieved to hear the HOA president was reasonable. "I've spoken with our attorney this morning, and the board will be covering any damages to your moving truck. We're also sending an official apology to the moving company." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "I should also inform you that we've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening to discuss Patricia's removal from the board. Her actions have exposed the HOA to significant liability." I nodded, unsure how to respond. While I was glad the HOA was taking the matter seriously, I hadn't expected such swift and decisive action. Mark continued, "I understand this isn't the welcome to Oak Ridge you deserved. This gift basket is a small token of apology from the board, just some local products and gift certificates to nearby restaurants. We truly do try to be a supportive community." After Mark left, I sat looking at the gift basket, which contained far more than some local products. There was an expensive bottle of whiskey, gift cards to several upscale restaurants, gourmet chocolates, and a handwritten note signed by all the board members except Patricia. Later that day, Frank invited me to a neighborhood barbecue in his backyard, explaining it had been planned for weeks, but the timing was fortuitous. "Everyone wants to meet you properly, without the drama." The barbecue turned out to be exactly what I needed. About 20 neighbors attended, each welcoming me warmly and sharing stories about the community, both the good and the occasionally challenging. I learned that Patricia had moved to Oak Ridge just a year earlier and had campaigned aggressively for a board position, promising to restore property values through strict enforcement of the bylaws. "The irony," said Linda, the woman whose grass had been measured, "is that our property values were doing just fine before she arrived. Now she's probably tanked her own home's value who wants to buy a house next to the woman who got arrested for HOA overreach." As the evening wound down, George Tompkins pulled me aside. "Scott, a bit of advice from someone who ran this HOA for 15 years. Get involved. Come to meetings, volunteer for committees. HOAs can be wonderful tools for building community, but they need good people participating to prevent power from concentrating in the wrong hands." I promised I would consider it, though the thought of HOA politics after my introduction to them wasn't particularly appealing. Over the next few days, I settled into my new home and routine, gradually unpacking boxes and making the space my own. News traveled quickly through Oak Ridge Estates. Patricia had been released on bail but was facing multiple charges. The HOA board had voted unanimously to remove her from her position. Howard was reportedly trying to convince her to sell their house and move to a non-HOA neighborhood. A week after moving day, I received a certified letter. My heart sank when I saw the HOA logo on the envelope, assuming that, despite everything, I was still being fined for the moving truck incident. Instead, inside was a formal apology from the board, confirmation that all charges related to my move had been dismissed, and an invitation to attend the next board meeting as an honored guest. There was also a handwritten note from Mark. "We need level-headed new residents like you. Consider running for Patricia's vacant seat." I laughed out loud at the suggestion. Me on the HOA board, after everything that happened. It seemed absurd, and yet I couldn't help but think about George's advice to get involved. 3 months later, I found myself sitting at the front of the community center meeting room, newly elected to the Oak Ridge Estates HOA board. My campaign platform had been simple: common sense enforcement, transparent communication, and a focus on community building rather than punitive actions. Apparently, after the Patricia era, this was exactly what the neighborhood wanted. As for Patricia Wilkins, her legal troubles continued. She ultimately pleaded guilty to lesser charges, receiving community service and probation. She and Howard sold their house and moved to another city, their brief but tumultuous time in Oak Ridge Estates becoming the stuff of neighborhood legend. My first official act as a board member was to propose a revision to the bylaws, creating a clearer, more concise section on moving trucks and establishing a simple online form for residents to provide notification rather than seeking permission. It passed unanimously. Sometimes at neighborhood gatherings, the story of my moving day still comes up: how a simple truck parking dispute escalated into a 6-hour standoff, property damage, and an arrest. What could have been a traumatic introduction to homeownership instead became a bizarre bonding experience with my neighbors. We laugh about it now, though I suspect the moving company still has me flagged in their system. Life in Oak Ridge Estates eventually settled into a pleasant routine. The HOA, under more balanced leadership, focused on maintaining the community's appearance without micromanaging residents' lives. We organized more social events, created a community garden, and established a more collaborative approach to addressing issues. Occasionally, I'll spot a moving truck in the neighborhood and smile to myself, remembering that chaotic first day. I always make a point to walk over, introduce myself to the new residents, and assure them that despite what they might have heard, Oak Ridge Estates is a wonderful place to live as long as you park your moving truck in the right spot. The irony isn't lost on me that I went from HOA victim to HOA board member in just a few months. But I've learned that homeowners associations, like any organization, are only as good or as toxic as the people running them. Patricia Wilkins mistook control for leadership, rules for community values. In trying so desperately to protect property values, she failed to understand that what truly makes a neighborhood valuable is the people who live there and how they treat each other. As I unlock my front door after another HOA meeting, this one lasting just 45 minutes, instead of the 3-hour marathons under the previous leadership, I can't help but feel grateful for how things turned out. My home has become exactly what I hoped for when I signed those closing documents: a place of comfort, community, and belonging. And whenever a new homeowner moves in, I make sure they receive a welcome basket that includes, among other things, a clearly written summary of the moving truck policy, along with a gentle reminder that in Oak Ridge Estates, we value neighbors more than bylaws.